The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor Podcast. This is a show that helps you become an even more awesome driving instructor and run a better driving school. As always, I am your splendid host, Terry Cook. I'm delighted to be here, but I'm even more delighted that you have chosen to listen, because this week's episode is a From the Vault episode, something I'm planning to do a bit more of going forward, because over the years we've had some fantastic conversations on this podcast, and occasionally it's worth going back and revisiting ones that are still really relevant today. So this episode was originally recorded in 2021 with performance psychologist Simon Hartley. Now, Simon works with elite athletes, leaders and organisations around the world, helping them understand what it takes to really perform at their best. And in this conversation, we explore things like passion, purpose, resilience, and what separates people who perform at a high level from those who never quite reach their potential. And the timing of this episode is actually quite nice, because Simon is going to be speaking at the Intelligent Instructor and ADI NJC convention I'm attending next week. So it felt like the perfect opportunity to bring this conversation back out of the vault and into the public stratosphere. Now, before we jump into the episode, I want to give a quick mention to the Instructor Performance and Psychology membership. The IPP membership sits alongside this podcast, and it's where we go much deeper into the topics that really matter for driving instructors. Things like coaching, mindset, teaching techniques, business development, pricing, marketing, and building a career that's about far more than just getting learners through a driving test. Now, inside IPP, there are hundreds of hours of content, including expert sessions with leading voices from both inside and outside the driver training industry, as well as coaching clinics, discussions, and practical ideas you can take straight into your lessons and your business. It's also a community of instructors who are genuinely interested in improving what they do, supporting each other, and pushing the profession forward. If that sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, you can find out more at patreon.com/instructor, or use the link in the show notes. But for now, let's open the vault. So welcome to the Instructor Podcast, where every week we speak to leaders, experts, innovators, and indeed game changers. And today we are joined by someone who fills several of those categories, Simon Hartley. How are you doing, Simon?
Very well indeed. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
No, it's great to have you on board. You're someone that I've wanted on the show for a while, and he's someone that's taken, I don't know if you'll appreciate me saying this, but it's taken a little bit of courage to pluck up to actually ask. So I really do appreciate you joining me. I'd like to ask everyone to start off with just to tell us a little bit about themselves and a little bit about what they're up to now.
Yeah, cool. So my background is sports psychology, which I've been doing for 25-ish years now. That means kind of working with sports teams and athletes, helping them to get their mental game right. But honestly, over the past 15 or so years, I've probably been doing the same stuff, but outside of sport, more than I've been doing it within sport. So helping people get their mental game right, not just athletes, and helping teams to win in whatever field they're in, whether that's kind of business, education, charities, healthcare, military, you name it, whatever. My passion, though, my real passion and interest has always been to study the very best in the world, to work with them, to study them, to uncover what it is they do differently, how they think differently, how they take on challenges differently, overcome setbacks, all of that sort of stuff, so that we can adopt those principles ourselves and become great at whatever we do.
Oh, and when you say the best in the world, is that a specific genre, or is that sort of anything that seeing how people compare in different categories?
Yeah, it's absolutely across the board. When I wrote my second book, it's called How to Shine, I wanted to understand world-class individual performers. So I'd worked with loads of athletes, and I'd seen them all at work, and I'd seen some people who were literally in the top handful in the world in their sport. I'd also seen people who probably had more talent but never made it to that level. And I'd started to distill down that there were a couple of principles that seemed to be common characteristics in these individual athletes. But I wanted to know, would those be the same characteristics? I see the same kinds of characteristics in any field of life. So when I wrote How to Shine, I looked at a world barista champion, a Michelin star chef, a mountaineer, a polar explorer, head of a world-leading science organization, science and medical research organization, because I wanted to know, are there common characteristics in all of them? And if there are common things that you see in all of those people in really diverse fields, the chances are they're going to be pretty generic and they'd apply to most of us, if not all of us.
Yeah. Interesting. That was the first question I was intending to ask you, whether there were those commonalities across every field. And are there? And sort of, do those characteristics spread across? And are you seeing the same characteristic repeated?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I did the research well over 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago on that. And if I look at world-class performers, the sort of the people around me, the people I work with now, they are exactly the same characteristics. They're pretty generic. They're pretty enduring. Yeah.
What, if you were to sort of just throw a couple of those characteristics out, what would you say there were? A couple of the main ones.
So the one that's probably foundational, really fundamental, is that these guys tend to be powered by passion. Then they don't just enjoy being successful. They're not just there to be successful in their field. They're there because they really genuinely are passionate about what they do. And sometimes there's a sort of an enjoyment in the process. Sometimes it might not be literally the process of doing it, but the challenge of doing it, the stimulation that it gives them, or that they know why it's worthwhile. That's why they're passionate about it. They care about it. It matters to them. It's important to them. I'll give you an example. There's a guy who I worked with for many, many years called Chris. He was a swimmer. And he would talk about those endless hours of staring at a black line on the bottom of the swimming pool. And that, that in itself wasn't particularly fun, trudging up and down a pool, especially when you're cold, it's cold outside, it's dark, it's wet in the morning, all of that. And you might be sore and tired from yesterday's training session. And, you've got 2 more training sessions today and you do this 6 days a week, kind of endlessly hour on hour on hour. But there's almost like a curiosity and an intrigue that comes with it all when you're trying to just become really, really good, ever better, as I call it, in this field. And that's really engaging for people. How do I knock a 10th of a second or a 100th of a second or sometimes a 1,000th of a second off of my time? What would I have to do? How could I possibly get better at this thing? That's what really kind of grasps them. And when I look at it, passion and curiosity go hand in hand. I often describe curiosity as sort of passion passed through the lens of a great question, as it were. That it's that usually really engages people, and it becomes probably more powerful than the medal at the end of it. Yes, of course they want the medal. All athletes that I've ever come across want the medal, but that's not the be all and end all reason for doing it. There's something deeper at work, and many of them genuinely want to achieve their potential. They want to know that whenever they finish doing this thing, athletes retire at a fairly early age normally. But whenever they finish doing this thing, they can look back and say, no regrets.
I think that's key. I mean, I'm by no means an athlete, but I would imagine it's if you do the absolute best you know you can do, that's the best you can do, and you've achieved your goal. And I think you make some key points there. I feel slightly under pressure now to produce some good questions for you. But I think the thing that you've just said there, you spoke about in passion and enjoyment and curiosity. And as you were saying them, it's straight away coming back to my profession of the ADIs, driving instructors. The ones that seem to enjoy the job most and essentially the ones that seem to be the most successful at it. And the ones that I see online and the various Facebook groups and social media and stuff, and it's just a job. We don't want to get big-headed, and they never seem to be happy. They never seem to enjoy it. But the ones that are like, it's not just a job. We're effectively changing someone's life. It might be giving someone potential for a new career. Or in my case, when I learned to drive, it would just been able to get to the cinema. But that made a big difference. And I think it's an interesting parallel. And just on that, you mentioned about the swimmer there. I'm presuming with that you were referring to Chris Cook. Because in your book, 2 Lengths of the Pool, it was something that really, really resonated with me in that book. And I think you spoke then about he was struggling and you kind of said something along the lines of, you just need to swim 2 lengths of the pool. And initially I'm taking a bit of offense at that. So I want to touch back on that a second, but that's something that helped me a lot with driving lessons, because for me, I don't just provide driving lessons. I provide theory test training. I've got Facebook groups. I've got podcasts out for, so I've got all this other stuff. And then I feel myself getting overwhelmed just because I've got to go and do a driving lesson. And from reading your books, like, you just need to go do a driving lesson. And then when I break it down to that, all of a sudden it feels a hell of a lot easier. So with people that have got that mentality, like you said, that almost Chris Cook have the mentality of, it's not just two lengths, and an instructor that might be, it's not just a lesson. How would you reframe that?
So there are sort of different levels of this. The passion bit, the curiosity bit, that kind of motivational drive is all revolves around the why. Why do you do it? And I'm a huge fan of having a powerful why. And one that's not just linked to the outcome of, if I do this thing, I get paid, or if I do this thing, I win a medal or whatever. It's not just linked to the outcome. It's linked to the reason why you do it. And one of my acid tests for motivation often is, what would happen if you won the lottery? Would you get up in the morning and do it again tomorrow? And there are a lot of people, even those who have their own businesses, have their own, kind of self-employed or whatever, who would say, if I won the lottery, there's absolutely no way I'd do this tomorrow. And you kind of think, well, in that case, there's probably some missing elements to your motivation. And the problem with motivation is, if there are some things that we absolutely need to keep us motivated, for example, if I'm doing this for money and I'm not earning as much, my motivation is going to rapidly evaporate. So we need a really stable base for motivation, and that's linked to our why. I can remember just touching on this one. For her 25th for her 25th birthday, I bought my wife a little second-hand car. She wasn't a driver at that point. I think she failed her test 4 times by that point. And I gave her, this little second-hand car, and she was going to go and get some lessons. She says that the biggest thing I gave her for that birthday wasn't a car, it was freedom. And the ability to go where she wanted, when she wanted, not to be reliant on me, not to be reliant on public transport, whatever it was. That's the thing I actually gave her. And when you talk about, what driving instructors potentially do for people, the impact that they can have, they probably don't realize how important driving is to that person. And if you wanted to find a purpose, from just my personal experience, there's a much, much deeper purpose, deeper reason to do what you guys do and do it well. And so that's the why. So a powerful why is at the heart of it. It's not the same as a what. And I'm also a believer in really simplifying what we do. And this is where, when I said to Chris, your job is surely just to swim 2 lengths to the pool as fast as possible. That's a really simple, clear job. It's simple. And actually, when we kind of strip away the extraneous stuff, it becomes a lot easier to do. But the reason why he swims is critical. He wants to achieve his potential. He wants to lay down his very, very best. He wants to finish his career saying no regrets. That's why. So they're not the same thing, and sometimes people kind of confuse them and intermingle.
I think that's fascinating, because it's something that I've been reflecting on a lot this year. And I realize that my goal for as a driving instructor is I want to get to a point where I can do 10 hours a week. And I don't want to stop. So like you mentioned about winning the lottery, I wouldn't stop teaching. I would just do less hours, because at the minute I need to do the hours I do for financial reasons. So which takes away some of that enjoyment. And I had a driving instructor named Sarah Baldock. She did a brilliant guest blog on my website for me. And she spoke about how she almost felt belittled, almost, that might be the wrong word, but by other instructors, that she wasn't doing all this amazing stuff. She was just teaching people to drive. But the blog is brilliant, because she comes to the end conclusion that that's what I want to do. I enjoy teaching people to drive. I get this satisfaction. And you could see, like you were talking about the why, that her why, well, she just loves working with these people. She loves that part of the job. And it's like, that's all you need to be. If you can, success is individual, isn't it? I believe anyway. Success for a Premier League footballer is going to be success for a Sunday League footballer in some situations, which will be different success for you and me. Would that be something you agree with, that success is individual?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. One of the issues that I think we have in society now is that we almost like rely on society to tell us what success means. And, if you think about all of those messages that we've probably had since we were, tiny kids, society will tell us success equals ... To be successful, you need to be ... Rich, famous, kind of good looking, whatever it is, you need to be all of that. How do you measure it? Well, bank account, size of your car, size of your house, number of followers on social media, whatever it is. And and that's what society, I think, would love everybody to kind of buy into. Because if you think about it, if we all believe that success equals more money, bigger house, bigger car, that's great for the commercial economy, isn't it? I mean, retailers will do really well, manufacturers, and that'll kind of help fuel the economy. But for a lot of people, that becomes like a hamster wheel that they just keep running on. And I'm a huge advocate of just stepping out of that and asking ourselves, what do we actually believe success looks like to us? Do we have to buy into all of that? Because, if you think about it, even if you weren't kind of sucked into the money, wealth kind of spiral, women have been getting, bombarded for years by you have to be this size, you have to fit into that dress, you have to be. Step out, decide for yourself, choose. Is that the definition of success that you want to subscribe to, or do you want something else?
How would you, what advice would you have for anyone that was struggling to decide what they would either class as success or what they want to achieve within their business? Because that's something I've struggled with, and I think it's taken me a long time to get a rough idea of where I want to be.
I mean, I've worked with lots of business leaders and entrepreneurs over the years, and some of them have just sort of slipped into that default mode of growing a bigger business. And some of them, when they get a couple of years down the line, turn around and say, what have I built? Why did I build it? I've just built this kind of monster. And it's now a hungry monster that I keep needing to feed. Actually what I've done is I've created a life for myself that I don't particularly want. I've created a business that I don't particularly want. And honestly, if you gave them the opportunity, they'd probably rewind time, go back again and ask themselves the question, what kind of business do I actually want here? What kind of business do I want? What kind of life do I want? Let's deliberately create that rather than building something that I don't want. And so that's kind of one element of it. And it's really easy, particularly if you subscribe to lots of the self-improvement, personal development messages out there. If you subscribe to all of those, you would end up saying bigger has to be better, more has to be better. There's a Danish philosophy that I really appreciate and embrace. It's called lagom, and it means enough. It means you are enough. You don't have to have more. More isn't necessarily better. You don't become better just because you have more. And it just gets you to kind of question these things so that you can decide for yourself. Many people, I think, have actually started doing this more during lockdown because we had a bit of a sort of a break. Things were thrown up in the air and lots of people just had an opportunity to start thinking about these things. I don't think there is a predefined answer, but I do think self-reflection is valuable. Pondering, I'm a huge fan of. Actually taking this stuff out when we go for a walk or whatever it is, and just starting to ask the questions of ourselves. My personal view on success, and this is one that I probably started to draw maybe 10 years ago. I became aware that my parents probably looked at my success. Their view of my success was related to what I'd achieved. So at school, what grades did I get? How good were my first couple of jobs, and what was my salary like, and how high profile were they, and all that sort of stuff. And then I write books and things like that. So that's a good sign of success. And I thought, that's not how I view my success. I don't work it on that basis. To me, I describe success as being proud of who I am. And that's very different to what I've done or what I've achieved or what I've accumulated, through the course of my life. And again, it was life experience that made me question this. I can remember one of my very first jobs in professional sport. I was working for a Premiership rugby team, and there was a guy there who was in the same sort of field. I was in sports science; he was more sort of strength and conditioning and fitness. And he said to me, "The better you are in this business, the more you earn, and I earn loads." And I was a very kind of impressionable 20-something-year-old at the time, and I sort of took that on board because this guy had worked for the British Lions, and he had a stellar career. So I thought, well, he maybe knows what he's talking about. And it was a few years later. I'd worked in Premiership football. I'd worked in Premiership rugby. I'd reached a pretty high salary level as I went through, and I still, I wasn't 30 years old yet. I'd owned the big flashy cars and all that sort of stuff. And a few years after that, I was driving around in a bit of a tatty little car. I was probably earning about a third as much as I was when I was working in Premier League football. And I thought to myself, am I a third as good? No, I'm better. I'm a better practitioner. I know more. I have more impact with my clients, But I'm actually far better at what I do now, but I earn a third as much. So it doesn't work, does it? And I can remember driving this little car around a ring road, and I said to myself, I'm not the money in my wallet. I'm not the size of my bank account. I'm not the size of my car or whatever. That isn't me. That's not my success either. It doesn't actually reflect how good I am as a professional, never mind as a person. So being proud of who I am is the way that I now view my success. Can I look myself in the mirror and say, I genuinely like you as a human being? And that's my kind of view of success. And it's not all or nothing either. It's not you're either wonderful or terrible. Sometimes I look at myself and say, yeah, I like you, but you could be a bit more generous sometimes. And so there's no perfection sort of involved here. And I'm really conscious now that I also want my daughters to understand I don't measure their success by their grades at school. I won't measure it by how successful they are in their careers either. I'm looking at how good a human being are you? Are you kind? Are you honest? Are you generous? Those are the sorts of qualities that I would start to look at.
There's a lot I want to touch back on there. You've said some big stuff. I just want to touch on that final point. I'm interested to ask you about that because from a personal point of view, I think that's a mindset shift I've had this year as well, looking at the person rather than an accomplishment. And you said about your daughters then about being proud of who they are. How did you make that mindset shift to looking at the person rather than the accomplishment? Because I still struggle. So, for example, my stepson, I'm not going to run through his report, but he brought his report home the other day. And my initial gut reaction was to be initially thinking, oh, well, he could be doing better there, could be doing better there. And it kind of have to take that step back and be like, but he's trying and he's doing his best and he's not going to be good in all these subjects. This one he's doing really, really well and because he enjoys. And actually, do you know what? Is it that 15-year-old teenager stage where he's just starting to come out of it and starting to be a bit more of a, talkative, pleasant human being again? But my initial thought was that negative. So how do you shift that mindset?
Yeah, I think there are all sorts of things that play into this. For a lot of people, they kind of need the external validation stuff because they haven't quite nailed the internal validation. And so on a very kind of individual personal basis, there are people who, in sporting terms, athletes, need the medal to tell them whether they're any good or not. And I don't know whether you've ever watched that. There's a film called Cool Runnings. Have you watched it?
Jamaican bobsleigh team, yeah.
Yeah. There's a little phrase or a piece in there, and John Candy plays the coach Irv, and he says to one of the athletes, "If you're not good enough without the medal, you'll never be good enough with it." And it's a kind of I think it's a brilliant reflection on life in general, because If you need the money, the car, the success, the award, the recognition from others, the validation, whatever it is, it probably means that we're not giving that to ourselves. We're not providing that to ourselves. There's another phrase that I've kind of tended to, which I've kind of created and adopted, which is that our ego tries to fill the hole where self-worth should be. Our ego is the bit that needs the validation. It wants other people to think well of us. If we already think that we're happy with ourselves, we don't need other people to be happy. So whether it's, what we get dressed up in the morning or what we present ourselves like on social media or whatever it is, it's our ego that's trying to kind of get that validation in some way. Or look at me, aren't I great? I got an award. Or, look, I've got the money. Whatever it is, that sort of that version of the medal that we're looking for. People also try and sometimes do this through others. So, sometimes parents look for that through their kids. If you're successful, that shows that I'm a good parent. And I see, I don't know whether you've ever stood on the side of a field and watched kids playing football, kind of 8-year-olds or whatever. And there's sometimes a coach on the sidelines bouncing up and down, shouting, swearing, screaming, tearing strips off the kids and tearing the referee up and all that sort of stuff. You think, what on earth is going on? And if you kind of dig under the surface, the coach cares about the result. Why? Because he's worried about she's worried about how it will reflect on them. And so they're desperate to win, to know that they're a good coach. And so you think, well, that's the form of validation that they're looking for here. What if they didn't need it? What if they already had that sense of self-worth and they didn't need to win or lose today in order to feel good about themselves?
So we're just taking a quick break from this episode because I want to quickly tell you about the Instructor Performance and Psychology Membership, or IPP. If you enjoy conversations like this one, IPP is where we go much deeper. It's a professional development membership specifically for driving instructors who want to improve not just what they do in the car, but how they think about their coaching, learning, and running their business. Inside IPP, you'll find hundreds of hours of content, including expert sessions with specialists from both inside and outside the driver training world, coaching clinics, discussions around mindset, teaching techniques, and practical ideas you can take straight into your lessons. It's also a community of instructors who want to keep developing, supporting each other, and pushing the profession forward. If you'd like to check it out for yourself, you can sign up of a monthly membership, or you can get a 16% discount on an annual option, or if you want to test it first, there's even a free trial for a full week. Just head over to patreon.com/instructor or use the link in the show notes. But for now, let's get stuck back into the episode. What I love about talking to people like yourself who are clearly outside of my industry is how reflective it is in our industry, what you're talking about. I think that, and I'm sure most industries are like this, but the driving instructor industry is very insulated. A lot of it is, it's different for us. It's different for us. But you were talking there about sort of the external and internal validation. And it's just clicked with me. That's the learners, that's the students. They are relying on the instructor, and part of what we're doing so much is to make them not need us. Even when they do something right and they look at us for reassurance, my question is, who's going to be reassuring you after your driving test? You've got to be able to do that. And just what you were saying then about the awards, there's a big, I'm going to use the word debate. There's a big debate in our industry at the minute about driving instructor awards, because there's a few that go on at the end of the year, as with any industry. And I think they're a brilliant thing. I really do. If only because it shares some positivity. But there's also that negativity around them. I think it goes one of two ways. And that negative side is, we shouldn't need awards. We're just driving instructors. Or, I get my reward from the student passing, that side of it. How important So I'm just going to reframe that slightly. My opinion on awards is, like I said, they're not necessary, but they're still nice. They're still beneficial. They still generate interest. They still make people feel good. That's my take on it. I'm not concerned if I don't get one. I'm going to be pleased if I do. What would your take on those external validations, i.e. awards like that, be?
Yeah, I think it all hinges around the meaning that we attach to them. And you're right. If you can turn around and say, yeah, if I get one, great, lovely. It's the same in my business. There are lots of professional speaker awards. Yeah, if I get one, that's wonderful. That's lovely. Do I need it? No. Uh, does it prompt judgment or jealousy or whatever? Hopefully not. No, because if it did, that would not be a positive side of it. So with any of these things, it's the same with hitting goals, hitting targets, and all that sort of stuff. It's the meaning that we invest into that becomes critical, not the thing itself. So yeah, if we can detach our emotions from it, our self-worth, our identity from those external things, we're usually in a far stronger place. The vulnerability comes when we attach all of those things to something external, whether that's feedback from somebody, whether that's an award, whether it's hitting a target, whatever it is, an outcome of some kind. When we attach our emotions, our self-worth, our identity to those sorts of things, we usually create trouble for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that comes back to what you were saying before about being proud of who you are. If you're proud of who you are, then those awards or any form of, recognition, whether it's a review or whatever, is just a bonus. And I think but it's becoming proud of who you are. I mean, back in the start of 2020, might be getting my years mixed up here. It's been a long few years. I started writing a book. I've since stopped and I've completely reframed it and gone back to writing it a different way. But I wasn't proud of who I was as a person. When you spoke about being proud of who you are before, I wasn't. I attached my value and my self-worth to what I was doing. And it was, well, I'm just a driving instructor and I'm not even a well-known driving instructor. Clearly I'm not. It was that kind of mentality. And really weirdly, it switched one day because I came home and, as always, when I come in the door, my dog came bounding over to see me. And it just immediately clicked. It's like, my dog thinks I'm awesome. Like,
Yeah.
every day, no matter what I've done, she thinks I'm awesome. And that kind of spurred this idea for a book, which was dogs. Well, initially, it was Dogs Don't Think You're Mediocre. And then I like dogs think you're awesome. Let's go with that one. And it just clicked for me. And then from then, it was just starting to look at myself differently. But if someone is struggling to find that self-worth, to find the things they can be proud of in themselves, what suggestions would you give them to start looking for that one thing or that spark?
Well, I mean, you've kind of alluded to it in the words looking for. Confidence in whatever form it is, same with self-belief and self-worth, comes from evidence. And the problem with most people, it's not the lack of evidence. The evidence is there, but they're not looking for it and they're not recognizing it and appreciating it. So, going back to your example, it wasn't just that day that the dog bounded up to you. She'd probably been doing it for years.
Yep.
The evidence was always there. But until you actually recognize it and appreciate it and embrace it, it doesn't have an impact. When you do, then actually you see the good that you're having in the world. You see the fact that actually what you're doing has a positive effect on those around you. And in lots of cases, we can see all of this through our relationships. I mean, you've just highlighted a relationship that wasn't with another human, it was with an animal, but it's still being highlighted through that relationship. Somebody essentially says, I love you. I really appreciate you. And what most people don't do is they don't go a stage beyond that and say, well, there must be a reason for that then. Because you don't have to. Nobody's got a gun to your head telling you that you have to bound up and give me a cuddle. And when we start tapping into that and ask ourselves, why are our friends our friends? They don't have to be. Why do they invest into that relationship? What are they getting out of it? They must be getting something, or else they just leave. Why are the people around you that are really close and genuinely give you their love? Why do they do that? There must be a reason. And when we start to understand what that reason is, we can see that actually the world's probably a better place for having us in it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that as instructors, we can, tie that to our students as well. And as much as we've spoke about not needing external validation, those students, they keep coming back for lessons. They're not all ditching me. They're not all ditching us. They're coming back and they leave us nice reviews and they recommend us. So to look at that and just think, well, we must be doing something right because, if they recommend us to our friends, they're not going to do that if they don't. They might not leave us, but they're not going to recommend us if they don't like us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those businesses, actually, your business, where you don't tend to get much repeat business. I mean, they don't need to take another driving test.
Hopefully.
until they're, until they're 80 or whatever it is that you do.
Yeah.
So yeah, there will be other ways that you have to detect it, not just because they come back for more. And actually, in my business, often the very fact that they don't need to come back is brilliant.
Yeah.
If we've done the job and they are now independent, because I'm a huge fan of making myself redundant from the process, and so that in itself represents a real success.
Just touching back on the dog for a second, one thing I did neglect to mention is that she'll come and give me the cuddle, but she'll leave me for a smell of bacon straight away. So, I tend to ignore that bit how easily she'll dismiss me. I do want to touch back on one other thing you mentioned earlier, which was the idea of growing your business. And you spoke about business owners you would work with who just followed that well-trodden path of growing their business and then almost potentially regretted doing it. I think that's really relevant and prominent in our industry as well, and a trap I almost fell into. And I will just caveat this for anyone listening that there is nothing wrong with growing your business. As a driving instructor, if you want to become a driving franchise and take on some franchisees, and nothing wrong with that at all. But I think it's the well-trodden path. And I think people feel they have to go down this certain road within our industry. And I very, very nearly did. And I'm still not quite sure what made me change my mind. In fact, I do know what made me change my mind. It was something you're familiar with, which is Success Unlocked and accelerators. And it was, I can't remember the video, but it was a video you and Dino had done in one of the guides. For anyone listening, Dino Tartaglia was on season 1 of the show. And you'd spoke about the growth and how it doesn't always go the way you intend it to. That triggered me. And it's like, I don't really want to do this. I want to try this other thing. And that's where this podcast came from. It's where my favorite podcast I do, which is now leading me down all these other avenues as well. So would you almost have a message for anyone that was scared to come off of that well-trodden path because it is the safe avenue, if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. And for a lot of people, it does look like an enormous leap of faith, stepping off that common path, but it might not be our path. And that's probably the honest reflection moment that we need. There are all sorts of ways, as I'm sure you'll have picked up from that video in the Success Unlocked group. There are all sorts of ways to build a business, and some of them, have there are lots of people who've been down that path, and we can kind of see that it's a tried and tested route, etc. And so there's a certain degree of confidence that people have that if you want to grow a business, you go and do it this way. Yeah, I have been in a very, very similar position where lots of people in my industry create a brand and they employ people to go out and deliver their method. And years and years and years ago, I had a conversation with Caroline, who's both my wife and, sort of other half of the business. And we were looking at the vision that we wanted. And the vision said very clearly, there will only be 2 people working in this business. We will only have 2 employees. Why? We don't want to manage employees. That's not what we want to do. I had an experience many, many years ago where I did grow a business in the kind of conventional sense. We had lots of other practitioners out there. And I ended up being a manager and thinking, that's not what I want to do. It's not my skill set. I want to be a practitioner. I've actually stopped doing the thing that I love and I'm good at and started doing something else. And actually, have I grown the kind of business that I want? It's not moving in that direction. So I think, for a lot of people, it does require a bit of a leap of faith. But there's part of the challenge, I think, comes when we say we're divorcing one idea, but we haven't got anything clear to move towards. So that puts us in a bit of a no man's land. It's called the unknown. And people are very uncomfortable often with the unknown. That's where the fear factor comes from. And I don't think often we have to leap from one to the other. Whenever we move into our discomfort zone, we've got the opportunity of what I call taking baby steps first, followed by some steps, followed by some strides, and then eventually leaps. And as we build our confidence, we start to extend our stride length. So we're more confident moving into this new territory. So one of my questions would probably be, what would start to give you the confidence that you could divorce one idea and start to move towards another, or at least question one idea and start to think about another? How do you kind of build that foundation of confidence? Confidence comes from evidence. What would you need to build in order to feel more confident that you can change direction on this?
I think that's a great question. And looking back, that's probably the thing I did almost unintentionally. The first thing I did away from driving lessons was the podcast called The 5 Minute Theory. I wanted to do this one for instructors, but I didn't feel safe doing this. You know, who am I to do this podcast? It was that kind of attitude. But I generally know more than learner drivers. So I feel that I could talk to them. And it was a 5 minute podcast. That's like the smallest thing I could do. And then going out and doing that helped build up my confidence. And then I was doing that regularly, and then came onto the instructor, and then now I've been asked to speak at places and write for magazines and all this kind of stuff. And it all started from that one 5 minute episode. And I think that's probably a really good example of what you were saying.
The other thing that you do with this is when you start taking those steps and you realize that actually it's giving value to you and value to others, it starts to build your passion in it. You know, one of those episodes you might have found that I think is in the Accelerator group of success engineers is on what I call PUMP methodology, purpose, meaning, and passion, and how you grow purpose, meaning, and passion, not find it. You know, one of the big myths, and when I first talked to Dino Tartaglia about it, one of those things that, you know, was a sort of I think a light bulb moment for him. You don't find your passion, you grow it. I describe it as kind of a spark to a flame. That initial idea that I might want to do X instead of doing Y, that might be my passion. For you, it might be podcasting. I don't know yet. I've never tried it. That's just a spark. If you wanted to turn a spark into a flame or a raging inferno, you'd have to feed the spark. You'd have to give it fuel and oxygen. That's what's going to grow it. And by stepping out and trying it and doing it and finding out that people gain value from it and that you quite enjoy it, that starts to feed the spark to become a flame. And when we do that more and more and more, we build it into, you know, becoming a fire. But it's only a spark to begin with until we do something else.
Considering doing a highlights package for this season of the podcast, and, you know, taking bits from every episode as like a final episode. I'm going to struggle breaking bits off of this because there's quality all over here. That's brilliant. But I want to switch this around a little bit. I want to come back to you a little bit more. You've dropped a whole load of wisdom there, but I want to speak specifically about two things. Firstly, be world class. Now, I'll be honest, this isn't something I'm overly familiar with. I've dabbled in be world class. I've taken I think 2 of the online courses that were on there. But tell us a little bit about that, what the idea is behind it, where it's going, who's it for, who's it applicable to, all of those questions.
Okay, cool. Well, Be World Class it's both the name of our business, Be World Class Limited, but it's also right at the top of the show, I was sort of talking about uncovering insights from world-class environments, whether it's individuals, teams, leaders, or organizations, you know, figuring out what makes them great and then helping other people to adopt those principles. That's what Be World Class is all about. It's helping people to adopt the principles. And it tends to work on sort of 3 levels: mindset, leadership, and teamwork. So one of those kind of lenses that we look through is you and your mindset. How can we help you adopt the kind of mindset that would enable you to become the sort of person that you want to be, achieve the sorts of things that you want to achieve? Because in order to get different results, we need to do things differently. But to do things differently, we need to normally become somebody different. Just reading books and learning more stuff doesn't always translate into doing things differently or achieving the success that we want. Loads of people, you know, sort of approach self-development by saying, I'm going to go read some books, listen to some podcasts, watch some TED Talks, whatever. Great, but what did you do differently? they also know that in order to achieve what they really want to, they probably need to change themselves. They need to become slightly different as a person. Not often transform themselves, but just develop some characteristics, grow some characteristics within themselves. It might be become more resilient or become more patient or become more consistent, whatever it is. They know that that's actually what's required to help them achieve what they want to. So mindset is one of the lenses that we look through. Leadership's another, teamwork's another. And it's all about helping people become different in those areas. Not just feel better, which again is something that most of the personal development, self-improvement industry kind of gears itself towards. Because feeling better isn't being better. And sometimes being better is hard work, so it actually doesn't feel particularly good in the moment. It's like having a really tough workout. It's great for you, but in the moment, it doesn't often, feel cozy and pleasant. So it's helping people, giving them the support and the structures and the mechanisms and the methods to be able to do that.
I like that. I think you've kind of touched on a point where I'm at now, and I'm sure a lot of people in business are at this point where you put the work in. You're at that point where you're putting all that work in, but it's still hard work, and you're not quite where you want to be. You're not at the point where you could just ease off yet. And it's so easy to give up at that point. It's like I joke all the time that I stopped doing this podcast 7 days a week. Every day I give up this podcast, and then 10 minutes later I'm back on it. I'm sure there's stuff in Be World Class about this. You spoke about this almost a step-by-step process, but how do you keep going? Because it's something you've done throughout your life. You've kept going. You've dealt with adversity. How do you keep going when it's hard?
Yeah, and this is where two characteristics really come into their own. Tenacity, which is the ability to just keep going and not quit, and resilience, which is the ability to bounce back and bounce back stronger. And I think in combination, they're really, really powerful. I mean, if we've just got the sort of head down charge mentality, one of the dangers is we might not actually learn anything along the way because we're just like trying to bulldoze our way through. The ability to bounce back, learn, and come back stronger, in combination with that, is a really powerful force. And we've got a couple of programs. One of them is World Class Espresso. We'll call it World Class Mindset Espresso program, which helps to start to understand how you build consistent focus, confidence, motivation, step into your discomfort zone to perform better under pressure, etc. And a lot of that is the foundation to being able to develop these characteristics. There's another session that you might have discovered, and we call it our episode 0 in Be World Class TV. It's open as a free preview, actually. That is a 20-minute kind of insight into mental toughness, tenacity, resilience, and composure are the 3 sort of critical characteristics to mental toughness. It was actually taken from an interview that Dino Tartaglia and I did in Rome for one of our Success Engineers events. We sort of tagged in the book launch for my 8th book, Master Mental Toughness. And we were talking about how you develop these characteristics. So there's an episode, of sort of a free to access episode on mastering mental toughness, which talks through the process. It's a 5-stage process that people can go through to really develop these characteristics.
Would you suggest maybe that's a good starting point for anyone looking at coming to Be World Class?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's there deliberately as a sort of a free to access resource that people can go into. And I'm a real fan of, see whether it's valuable for you, see whether this stuff works for you, see whether this is what you need. If it is, there's far more that you can access, but to get some value from this first. If this is all you ever do, if you only access the free stuff and it gives you value and you don't go any further, that's fine. As long as you gain value from it and really start to use it. But if you start to think, actually, this is the kind of stuff I need and I need some more of it, there's more behind it. So
there will be links for this in the show notes, so make sure you go and click on those and you get access to that straight away. But the one more thing I want to touch on before I let you go, your books. So you've got a collection of books that you've written across the years. Admittedly, I haven't read them all. The one that's most prominent to me is the 2 Lamps of the Poem. I spoke about that before. I think that for me, I'm one of those people that's guilty of, just looking at everything and clustering everything up and then everything being really complicated. Whereas right now, what I'm doing is I'm talking to you for an hour. And that's it. I don't have to worry about anything else right now, question after question, and then we're good. But I mean, there's more to the book than that, obviously, but I'm just interested to find out what made you start writing these books. Was it almost a therapeutic process for yourself, or could you see there was a need for it? And if you could just give a little summary around to answer the pool, that would be awesome. Just a couple of lines, because I think, and I will put a direct link for that book in the show notes if I can, because I think that book is absolutely perfect for driving instructors. We are massively guilty of weighing stuff down. So yeah, I think I've asked you 2 questions there, so I'll let you take what you want from those.
Yeah, no worries. So the reason to write the books is always the same. It's because there's some insight, some understanding that I've uncovered, which I know is valuable to me. I know it's valuable to the people that I've worked with directly, and therefore it's probably going to be valuable for more people. And I just want to share that so that they can gain benefit from it. And I've always kind of worked on the basis that, I mean, writing books can make you some money, yeah, but it doesn't often, if you think about the number of hours you put into it, it's not, you don't do it to earn money. It's not the reason to write a book. You'd be better off doing something else if you just wanted to earn money. So it's really to start sharing these ideas and create something that somebody can gain benefit from. They could pass it on to somebody else. You just kind of multiply, increase the magnitude of the benefit that you can create, by writing a book. Creating digital programs is exactly the same. It's just a digital form of trying to do the same thing. And my philosophy has always been, if it helps one person, it was worth doing. If it helps 2, it was twice as worthwhile. If it helps 3, it's even more worthwhile. So that's the why behind writing the books. To lengthen the pool is a really, really, really simple idea. It's all about simplifying, clarifying, stripping back, taking out of the complexity that most people build in. It's not inherently there within what you do. Most people overcomplicate what they do. And our human brain is far better at overcomplicating than it is at simplifying. So normally we need a little bit of a helping hand to simplify things. Simplification's not easy. It's more difficult, which is why we tend to overcomplicate things. But the value when we do simplify and clarify is enormous. It helps us perform better. It clears our headspace. It helps us become more focused. Because we're more focused, we're more effective, sometimes infinitely more effective. We get far more out of the time that we have. And so if we can start to simplify and clarify, the chances are that we gain all sorts of benefit, performance, kind of mental health, we get time back, we're more relaxed, that sort of stuff. And most people, in truth, are spinning their wheels. They're doing far more than they need to get the results that they're getting. And this is about trying to help them to get more out of their time and energy and become, far more productive and effective with the time and energy that they have.
Awesome. All right. Well, we really appreciate you joining us today. I'm just going to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find you, anything else you want to promote. And again, I will put all this stuff in the show notes.
Sure. Well, the best place to start probably is just hit the homepage of our website, which is b-world-class.com. That's sort of B for Bravo, E for Echo, -world-class.com. And then I often say to people, just follow your curiosity from there. If you want to learn more about mindset, hit the mindset button. If you want to learn more about teamwork, leadership, hit those buttons. If you want to just sort of see whether this stuff resonates, there's even a box down there to sign up for the Insight, which is our little sort of 4 times a week normally. It's not an e-newsletter. We send out videos and, little links and memes and all sorts of things through there and insights from it. And if you just wanted to sort of test the water and find out whether this stuff resonates, have a couple of weeks worth of that and see whether this stuff does make sense to you.
Cool. Well, really appreciate you joining us. Oh, one last thing. Could you leave us a book recommendation to go away? Just so you know, I have been asking every guest that's come on for a book, and my idea is that I'm then going to go and read all of these books in 2022. So it's going to be a very good year. So we're going to leave us a book recommendation.
Yeah, there's one book that I would say, it's probably the only book that I would say I would recommend to every single person on the planet. And it's called Man's Search for Meaning. It's by Viktor Frankl, and it's not a particularly long read, but I would challenge anybody to say it doesn't really properly change their life. I mean, most people that I know that have read it have said that had a really profound impact on them.
I must admit, when you said that one book that everyone on the planet should read, I thought it was going to say Two Lamps of the Bull. I thought that was going to be that one.
I didn't think recommending my own books. But
No, but I really appreciate you coming on. I am just going to mention, just before I let you disappear, that you're very much an inspiration from afar. One of the things that I've learned over the past year, partly from you and partly from Two Lamps of the Bull, is that you can't do everything at once. So I've taken a massive step back in some areas this year and focused on the things that I need to focus on the parts of my business, focus on looking after my wife, focus on looking after me, focus on the key areas. That's helped me massively get through lockdown. That's part of the reason why. So we're in a familiar group, Success Unlocked and Accelerators. That's part of the reason why I'm not as active in there at the minute, because that's not necessary. What's necessary is I do this, but it's there when I need it. And going forward, I will be using it more. Going forward, I will be probably more interactive with yourself online going forward, because you are that. I've got a few of them that I want inspirations from afar. So yeah, I just felt it was appropriate just to mention that. And I really appreciate you joining us and giving us some of your time today. It's been awesome.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.